Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hello and welcome to the ISO Show. Thank you for joining me today. I'm joined by Steve Mason, who's a managing consultant here at Blackmores, to continue with our two-part series on ISO 17021, the conformity assessment standard for certification bodies providing audit and certification of management systems. Welcome back, Steve.
Hi, good to be back, Mel.
Great. So in the last episode, we talked about 17021 and the significance of that standard in relation to the fact that these are the golden rules ultimately for certification bodies and in effect acting as a service level agreement. These are the rules that the certification bodies need to comply with if they are accredited by an accreditation body like UCAS, for example. And so just to kind of continue on from our conversation, we did touch on the fact that there have been some issues raised by some of our clients time and time again over the last, I'd say, probably 6 to 8 months or so on certain key areas. And I just wanted to basically to break some of these issues down, which I think would help our listeners to understand what are the actual rules around these areas in relation to that standard. So ultimately, what should the certification body be doing? I think the first one I'd like to pick on is cancellations. Now, putting ourselves into the certification body's shoes, I appreciate that quite often there's a lack of resources and you do have to cancel visits, or you have to cancel some consultancy visits at times. But obviously there are rules around cancellation. Could you just break down these rules, Steve, and what the current issue seems to be at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there should be notification given to customers about cancellations, and sometimes we don't always see that happening. I was at a visit on the 5th of September, and the assessor just didn't turn up. And it just turned out that whilst the date was in the previous report, it had been removed from his diary, but it hadn't then been put into somebody else's diary. And because it hadn't been put into somebody else's diary, there was no flag to anybody to let the client know that the visit should take place. Now that visit's had to now be pushed back into January next year, which is the only time we can make it in that sense. So there are lots of things. As long as the customer knows about it, I think that's what's important. But I think what's unfair is there's an expectation from certification bodies that clients should not cancel a month or less than a month before their visit. I think that should apply to certification bodies cancelling for clients. Because what they're not doing is they're not taking into account the cost to the client for getting ready for that certification visit. The cost might include getting directors' diaries sorted out. It might include getting consultants' time in. There's lots of things that have been included which certification bodies just don't seem to be aware of, or if they are aware of it, they're just ignoring it. My personal preference would be that I would urge people to go back to their certification body and say, that's fine, if you want to move it, are you going to give me a 25% discount? Because there's going to be a cost involved that that company's got to recover somehow. So let's get a fair playing field on this. Let's see the certification bodies just being a little bit more sensible about this. Yes, you're quite right. Sometimes you can't do things because of unexpected illness or a funeral's turned up or something like that. And that's understandable, and I'm sure clients would understand that. But often it just seems to be that clients are being moved around left, right and centre at the last minute, and I think that's when they need to turn around and say, okay, if we move you within 30 days, we'll give you a discount. Sort of thing. Or even just turn around and say, we're not going to move you within 30 days because we appreciate the efforts you're making to make people available for that assessment.
I think the key point that you're making, Steve, is about making it fair.
Absolutely.
Isn't it? I think that's all. There is some fairness, and it's definitely one-sided as far as the penalties are concerned. If a client cancelled 2 or 3 weeks beforehand because they had personal circumstances which meant that they couldn't attend, they would be penalised. They would have to pay in full for that visit.
Yeah, I've seen that happen. Yeah.
Yeah, the certification body can not show up on a day and there's no compensation whatsoever. And
No, there isn't.
I totally agree. I don't think there is any fairness in that. I think it must be stressed, though, that this isn't the norm for all certification bodies.
No.
Most certification bodies are really great at this, but I think overall, I think, there are a few that unfortunately do it time and time again.
I think it's been exacerbated recently because we know there's a shortage of assessors around, lots of things moving. Even we find it in the consultancy world, where do you find the people from to job roles? So that is appreciated. But, let's get some sensible approaches behind this and make it fair so that people can rely on that certification visit taking place.
Yeah. So I think the other issue that's been cropping up is about planning audits. And it's not just the surveillance audits, but also stage 1 and stage 2. And
Yeah.
we seem to be going round and round and round the houses with certain certification bodies. And yeah, the clients are just getting incredibly frustrated around this. So what are the requirements in terms of audit planning for a certification body?
Right. When it comes to a stage 1 visit, there should be a plan given to the client of what's going to happen in a stage 1 visit. And that plan is often not happening. Or there's a generic plan that gets sent out by the certification body which bears no relevance to what the assessor ends up doing. So that's as useful as a chocolate teapot. Really, the person that's been assigned to the job should or probably have their own way of doing their assessments. That's fine. Get them to send out that audit plan so that the client knows what's happening and send it out a month beforehand, because then the client's got time to arrange it and get people in. Don't assume that you can send a stage 1 plan out 2 or 3 days before the visit and the client's going to be ready for you. It's just not reality. Companies are busy nowadays, so give the company a good month to be able to organise themselves. If they're not organised when you go into stage 1, and you've given them a month's warning, well then that's a different matter. You take that with the client in the visit. But at the moment we're not seeing, in some cases we're not even seeing a plan turn up. On one occasion I had to write a stage 1 plan based upon what I used to do, which actually wound up the certification body, and my response was, well, if you bothered to write one, I wouldn't have to. And I think, that goes with everybody, every certification body. So
Yeah. Or even having an assessor turning up expecting to assess one standard when it's actually another standard.
yeah,
So I know that we've had a case with ISO 27001 and it was somebody turning up expecting to do 9001. I think we've had those scenarios on a few occasions.
yeah, absolutely. So really, when it comes to planning, clients are well within their rights to keep hassling their certification body and saying, where's my plan? Where's my plan? And this is probably, I have seen people contact their assessors. Now, assessors are very, very busy out there. And I have seen some assessors come back in a rather snappy fashion saying, I'm too busy to deal with this. And that doesn't look good for certification bodies.
Mm.
Because you immediately, right from day one, you're putting barriers up. So get this right from the start. It's quite easy. There's nothing difficult about this, and make sure those plans are out there. Now, when we get to stage 1 finishes, there should be a plan that comes out stage 1. Often that plan comes out after what's known as the program management day. The reason for that is because the assessor sometimes needs to go away, look at what they've written up and take into account what they've heard from the client and put a reasonable plan in place. I've got no problem with that. But when there's a program management day, there should be an output from that of a plan that's absolutely clear of what's going to take place. But before that happens, the assessor should have sat down with the client to discuss the plan and discuss, what sites are going to be visited. Because often we see plans come out with language in the plans that is all right for a certification body, but the client has no idea what the assessor is on about. So I always used to sit down with my clients and say, right, what language do you want me to use that you're going to understand? And I would use their language and I would then put the clauses of standard next to that and say, that's the bit I'm going to audit. You're writing the plan for the customer, not for yourself. You're writing for the customer. Because often, let's say assessor 1 writes that plan, he or she then goes off sick, and assessor 2 comes in and starts reading off that plan. They may not recognise what that assessor's written, and they then say to the client, well, what was meant by this? And the client shrugs their shoulders and says, oh, don't ask me. And I was only talking
Can you give an example of that, please, Steve? Yeah, just to put this into context.
Yeah, there was a client this week I was talking to, and they'd referred to a lot of generic processes in the standard, which the client really hadn't got a clue how that related to their business. And so what they were saying is, well, where do you do X, Y, Z? And they said, well, what do you mean by that? And if they'd actually sat down with the client at stage 2 or stage 1 or any other visit, clients could have had that discussion. So, oh, we call that our XYZ process. So if you put XYZ process in, we'll know what you mean by that. So it's just about using jargon and generic terms that don't mean anything to the client. Use words that the client understands, because we do know that assessors will change from visit to visit. That's understandable. But make it easy. Don't expect the client to understand a certification body's jargon, because they won't.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we look at the standard, there are some very clear rules in the standard about audit planning. So it does say in 923 about audit planning, it says the certification should ensure that the audit plan is established prior to each audit, identified in the audit program, to provide the basis for agreement regarding the conduct and scheduling of the audit activities. So that is a requirement. If they fail to put a plan in place, they are not meeting a requirement of 17021.
Yeah.
Then we look further down, it talks about different sites. It says that, if you've got an organisation that's got different sites, then the plan should take into account the different sites and whether the visit's going to be on-site or off-site, because we're now in a post-pandemic world and there's a lot of remote assessing, so that's fine, it's appropriate. So that needs to be put in there. And also the expected duration of an on-site audit activity. Now, recently I came across an audit plan which was just a list of all the requirements of the standard. It was across 5 days, but there was no indication as to which day those requirements were going to be assessed. There was no indication as to how long each of those requirements is going to be assessed. So what could the client do to prepare for that? So it wasn't acceptable. I did say to the client, send it back and get a proper plan, but they had absolutely no joy with the certification body. The certification body just wasn't supportive. I have had another organisation that's got a location in Bath, London and South Africa, and the plan that was put in place for their assessment only covered London. So the bit for Bath and bit for South Africa all came at a later date. Now they've got a new assessor in, and she's been very, very good. And she's actually got a head around this and actually produced a good 3-year plan and a good visit plan moving forward. So A, the client's now happy, and B, any assessor going in is going to know what's going on. So it's just a bit of effort into the planning, and we'll all be happy. So those are the bugbears around planning. Is either no planning at all or very, very poor planning. And that only just serves to break down any sort of relationships that are being built.
Yeah, I mean, we had a situation last week in relation to audit planning, and this was in relation to a company that's been certified for many years to a couple of ISO standards. And for some reason, the certification body had cancelled the surveillance audits to 2 of the sites. And because there was such a delay, the client was actually moving offices in 2 of those locations. One was literally just down the corridor, actually, but it was going to be a slightly different address, and another one was going to be across the road. And the client was really surprised when they got a quote through, a proposal for an extension of scope. And the extension of scope was for an extra 3 days. So it's an extra 3 days because they'd literally just changed the first line on their address. Now, looking at 17021, because I looked at that at the time, I thought, well, hang on a second, there isn't anything at all that says that if you're moving address, that it warrants an extension of scope. My understanding was if there was an acquisition, an extension of services, or a reduction, for example, I mean, what's your view on that, Steve?
Well, we need to look at what the title is, extension to scope. It means that the scope is changing. Either you're changing what you're doing or you're adding a location to the scope of that certificate. If you're doing exactly the same scope as before, so you're literally lifting your business up, moving it a few yards down the road and putting it back down again, that is not an extension to scope.
No.
That's just a change of address.
Mm.
So that is absolutely wrong to be asked to do an extension to scope. It's a move of address. I have heard this before, and all it does, it serves to wind clients up, because they just then see that the certification bodies are making money for the sake of making money, and I'm sure that's not what they intend to do. I think it's because people aren't being told in the certification bodies what can be offered or what the rules are. So do a bit more training internally, so when you communicate to your customers, you're communicating correctly to the customers. A similar thing to that, I did have a client that was in location A, and when they had their visit, they were in location A. From that visit to the next visit, they moved sites to a new location, and when they phoned up the certification body and said, "Oh, we've now got a new location, nothing's changed," they were then charged £160 to change the address on their certificate.
Mm.
And that is outrageous, absolutely outrageous. I know you've got to charge an admin fee, but
Yeah.
it doesn't cost £160 to change an address on a certificate. That's just beyond belief.
Yeah.
That's my personal opinion on that. But and again, it's caused the client to be upset.
Mm.
They just find it's just another thing within their whole relationship with their certification body that leaves them with a sour taste in their mouth.
Mm.
If you think back to, all of us are used to our standards, and we're all used to 9001. And even the basics there, it says, understand your interested parties and their needs and expectations. And it flummoxes me that certification bodies don't seem to be doing that basic. They don't seem to be understanding the needs and expectations of their customers. Perhaps that's a requirement that needs to appear in 17021. It doesn't at the moment, but perhaps it needs to appear in there.
That's a very good point, Steve.
Yeah, the first requirement, before you do anything, before you set up any sort of certification body, understand the needs and expectations of your interested parties. What are the needs and expectations of your customers? Because at the moment, they're not always being met.
Mm. Okay, we're almost out of time, Steve. But I mean, are there any other areas within Clause 9 that you would like to pick up on that has been a bit of an issue for certified organisations in the past?
Yes, yeah. I know in the last one we spoke a little bit about non-conformities and assessors assessing to their preference and things like that. I would like to just go a bit further on that one, is that, if client, a company, isn't happy with their non-conformities, there is an appeals process. This is a requirement of 17021. I was actually absolutely astounded when I heard that one assessor had said to their client, "Don't bother with the appeals process because it'll only delay the delivery of your certificate." I wasn't at that visit, and had I been, then that assessor would have got a rocket, absolute rocket, because that is not in line with 17021. The appeals process is there.
It's not very professional, is it, at the end of the day?
No, absolutely not. It's definitely not professional. The appeals process is there to help clients, if they disagree with their assessor, is to go to that sort of third party that's within the certification body and say, "Look, I don't agree with this. Can you explain why it's a non-conformity?" And then there'll be people in compliance of risk and other people within certification bodies that will look at it and say, "You know what, that isn't a requirement of the standard, so we'll actually waiver it." And I've had a number of non-conformities successfully removed because they've not met the requirements of the standard. And if I go back to that statement that I mentioned in the last podcast, it says that a finding of a non-conformity shall be recorded against a specific requirement. And that goes back to what you said in that podcast, Mel, that your biggest question you should ask an assessor if you get a non-conformity is, show me where in the standard it requires me to do that. If an assessor cannot show you that, it is not a non-conformity. Okay? It might be an opportunity for improvement, but it's definitely not a non-conformity. So we need to push back on that one. But don't be afraid of the appeals process. The appeals process will not go against your certification. It will not mean that the certification will take it out on you at a later date. It's got nothing like that. And these are all the fears that clients have out there. They think, oh, it's going to impinge on my future assessments. I'm not going to get good service in the future. Or they'll probably turn around and say, you can't have a certificate now because you're arguing with us. No, none of that. That is far from the truth. And perhaps this is a lesson for certification bodies. Communicate to your customers exactly what the appeals process is, and also make it clear that it doesn't prejudice them in any way in the audit process, the assessment process. So use that appeals process if you don't agree. And of course, there is the complaints process that sits on top of that. The complaints process really is not about appealing against a non-conformity, but complaining against perhaps not getting your plans in your reports and all that sort of thing. Everything else we've mentioned in this podcast. So do use the complaints process. Over and above that, if you're not getting satisfaction from your certification body, and I do hope you do get satisfaction, you can always take it to UCAS.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the issues that have been cropping up at our monthly team meetings that our consultants have been flagging up on behalf of our clients. Again, this isn't for the majority of certification bodies. There just seems to be one or two that can't seem to get their act together on this. And this is actually issuing the damn certificates.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
The client spent, I don't know, 6 to 12 months working the backsides off to implement an ISO management system. They go through the stage 1, the stage 2, and they're waiting not just weeks, but months
Yeah.
to get the certificate. Now, I don't want to put people off going for ISO certificates here. It's not always this bad. This is literally the minority, but we are just bringing these things up because obviously we want to highlight the fact that there is a code of practice. It's technically not a code of practice. It is actually a specification for certification bodies, which is ISO 17021. Obviously, the whole point of this podcast. But it is just to raise the fact that, yes, there is a complaints procedure and use it. If you're wasting hours on end chasing certain things that aren't getting done, and take a look at 17021 because that's what you can fall back on.
And the way they do that, the complaints thing is just to phone up customer service or whoever and just say, I wish to raise a formal complaint. Do that way. Don't be put off. You wish to raise a formal complaint. That's what's important. The other thing I will say on the certificate front, yeah, we know that there's a process behind every certification visit. It's got to be checked by compliance and risk. Yeah, that takes a few days to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you do expect a delay, perhaps 4 to 6 weeks maybe, depending on whether there's a heavy workload coming through. And certainly there's heavy workloads coming through in transition periods. So you expect a bit of delay.
Yeah, I mean, we do manage expectations as well, don't we? We do say that it can be up to, 6 weeks to receive the certificate, and some certification bodies will turn them around within 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Most do it within a month, but there's just a couple that are just taking months. Personally, I just don't think that's good customer service. I don't think it's acceptable.
No, it isn't. It isn't. Yeah. And on a similar vein, it's about also receiving reports. Sometimes we know the client managers, it's a tough job being a client manager, absolute tough job. It's, you sell yourself to the devil.
And Steve, because you've been there as well.
That's right. Yeah, you sell your soul to the devil. And most of your work you end up doing in your own time, weekends and evenings and things like that. But to wait 3 or 4 months for an audit report to come through isn't good practice either.
No.
That's only happened once, but it shouldn't have happened,
I can think of 2 other occasions, Steve.
Well, yeah, and if an assessor needs to go away and write a report, that's fine. Write your report in your own time. But let's have it back at least 2 or 3 days later. Don't leave it 2 or 3 months, so...
Yeah, because when you get that report then, it's like, well, what the hell was that? You don't have a clue what the findings are actually about because it was so long ago.
No, that's right. That's right, yeah. What visit was that?
Yeah.
Ending on a lighter note.
Oh, well, that's been a real pleasure speaking with you today, Steve. And probably quite good therapy, actually. I feel as though, Uploaded a bit there, rightly or wrongly, on the podcast for everybody to hear, but there we go. No, I think it's been really great for you to highlight the requirements of 17021. I hope that's been helpful for our listeners. So, yeah, thanks once again, Steve, for sharing your knowledge and experience and expertise with us on that subject.
That's a pleasure.
Great. Okay, and hopefully we'll get you on the podcast again soon to talk about some more positive aspects of standards, maybe ISO 20000, because we haven't actually covered
Oh, yes.
that for quite some time. I think we might have done way back in the day when we first started the podcast, but yeah, that's another area that I know that you're an expert in, which is
One of my favourite standards, and I hear I'm big in South Korea.
oh, interesting. Okay, we'll delve into that next time then.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Steve. And thanks, everybody, for listening to the podcast today. I hope you've enjoyed listening to the ISO show. Don't forget, if you'd like to find out more about ISO standards, go from learner to leader in any of the mainstream ISO standards, then please do go and visit www.isologyhub.com, which is the go-to place for everything to do with implementing and learning about the ISO standards. Thanks once again. I look forward to catching up with you on the next episode of the ISO show.
Looking to achieve certification to an ISO standard or just need a helping hand with ISO compliance? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com